Hi. First of all, I apologize for the delay. We had some Zoom issues with my kids' schooling. But hopefully there won't be any delays anymore. And also, I'm going to try and release these videos earlier in the day because I think it's easier for people to watch. Maybe even in the mornings. We'll see. So, the last time we left, we were speaking about Simcha, what Simcha means, how Simcha and Bitochon are symbiotic and connected to each other. And when one goes up, the other goes up. And when one goes down, the other goes down. And the Chovos HaLevavos is now actually going to get into that a little bit in his own language. And I think that there's a lot to dig into here. I don't think I'm going to be able to get to everything I want to get to in one video because otherwise it would be too long and unwieldy. And it's important to keep these videos digestible. So let's jump right into it. I am Laser Weiss, and thank you for joining me in this Shar Habitochon Chovos HaLevavos journey. So, story time. For those of you who don't know, I am a proud college dropout. In the time that I was in college, I took a class called Developmental Psychology. The professor, very educated gentleman who had a PhD, started class one day and he said, I see a lot of you yeshiva graduates. I remember being in yeshiva. I remember learning a lot of Musar Sfarim and dictums of Chazal. And I was always so impressed by how Chazal knew certain things about, the human mind. It was so impressive that they knew certain psychological things. They were often very close to being, on the nail about a lot of stuff, and some stuff they even got right, which is incredible given that they didn't have, modern methods of research, etc. And, he went on in that vein for a little bit, and I was nauseated. I was so disgusted. And to my eternal shame, till this day, I really regret that I did not stand up and make a machal. I should have. It was terrible. It was in front of a lot of guys who were, in fact, yeshiva graduates. And I was young. That's my only defense. I was young. I was foolish. I didn't have the courage and the guts to do what I think was right. And it was a terrible thing. It was a terrible chol Hashem, and hopefully it didn't influence any of the people who were in that class negatively. Why was he wrong? Well, of course, it goes without saying because it's insane. Hashem wrote the Torah. Hashem created human psychology. Chazal weren't researchers. They didn't study human psychology. Any psychological insight that they said was because they were speaking from their knowledge of the Torah. They weren't guessing. If they didn't know something to be 100% true, they didn't say it. They were anshe emes. Their midos were so perfect that to us, we wouldn't even be able to understand how human beings could attain such perfection in midos if we would meet one of them. So they obviously only said something if they knew it was true. And if they knew it was true, it was from the Torah. And if it was from the Torah, then it was put there by God, who created human psychology. So I think he knew pretty well the way we work. So therefore, you have to understand something. If a person looks at modern psychology and studies human behavior from that angle, you will encounter all sorts of things that are logical and rational and make a lot of sense and are also completely wrong. The only way to understand human psychology is if you studied the Torah. The Torah has insights that no human being would ever be able to know. There are just certain things that you can't know, and you're going to see some of them in the Chovos HaLevavos. They're just impossible to really come to and grasp fully. And even if you could know them a little, you wouldn't know 100% that they're true and how malleable they are, between different people. So when you see that the Chovos HaLevavos says a certain concept, you'll see that, it's a true in a way that you simply, I don't think any amount of research could necessarily teach us. That's number one. Number two, there are certain things that I don't think are necessarily clearly logical if you don't start off with the assumption that the Torah is true. And what I mean by that is, if the Torah is true, then I'll tell you a certain psychological rule, and you'll say, oh, that makes sense. If there was no Torah and no Hashem, you would be like, why would people be like that? It's only because Hashem created us that way, and we know that that's true from the Torah, that certain things even make sense to accept as being psychologically true. Okay, enough preamble. Let me explain. Let's get into it. So we said, again, that bitachon is the greatest necessary ingredient to be in Oved Hashem. Let us look now to the Chovos HaLevavos, who says, he's discussing what the Toel Yosef are of the bitachon. Right? He says it has mashish. Now, commonly it's translated as benefits. Unfortunately, teyeles, like hashkafa, like many other words in Hebrew, is extraordinarily difficult to translate into English. Toeles means more than just a benefit. It's like almost like you are dependent upon it, something that is you depend upon more than just like a benefit. But it's hard to translate that. But conceptually, you should know that it's not merely a benefit. It's almost like a life structure with, and if you don't have it, then there's inherently a negative to not having the toelis. Right, so it's not just like a benefit. It's more like something that you depend upon, but it is positive inherently. Okay, let's move on. I don't want to get too into that. There's room for somebody to correct me and say, oh well, I don't want to nitpick. But my point is, it doesn't just mean benefit. So what are the toelas in Torah, in the world of a Torah life? Mehen menuchas nafshay, you will have tranquility of the spirit. Uvitachon al likav yizbarach k'maisha eved chayav livtoach al adonav. And you will also have trust in Hashem in the way that an eved is chayav to be boteach in his master. Now, already we should be very careful about reading. Remember, I said that we're going to be extraordinarily careful in the way that we examine his words. He was a Rishon. Every word, every letter was very purposefully written. Even the translation that we're reading by Rav Yehuda ben Tiven was also done by a Rishon. I was just recently reading somewhere about the Chovos HaLevavos that Rav Yehuda ben Tiven originally only translated the first shar. He was actually nervous. He was overwhelmed by the greatness of the Sefer, and he was reluctant to translate all of it. He was considered the greatest translator in his time, and by the way, he wrote Svarim of his own. He was incredibly respected by his peers and his colleagues, considered among the Gedolei Rishonim. He was nervous to translate the Sefer. It shows you how seriously he took this. So every single word, every single letter is specifically put in place. There's a vav right here, this vav right here, where I'm pointing. I don't know if you can see it. It says, Mehem menuchas nafshay uvitchaynai. That means that there's two separate things here. Menuchas nafshay, and as part of menuchas nafshay, you'll have bitchaynai al likav yizbarach k'maisha eved chayav livtoach al adonav. Bitachon in Hashem, like an eved who is chayav to be livtoach on his master. So stop, think, examine. You know what one of the benefits of eating apples is? That you will have eaten apples. If I said that to you, you would be like, what? Excuse me? But let's think about what the Chovos HaLevavos just said. Do you know what one of the tayaliyos hagadolos of having bitachon is? That you'll have bitachon. Excuse me? Surely we need to think a little bit and try and delve into these words. Well, what's menuchas nafshay? What is menuchas nafshay? And why are these two things tied together? I would posit, and I hope that I'm right, I have not seen anybody who says this directly. Menuchas nefesh roughly translates to tranquility of the soul. What is tranquility of the soul? The only thing I think, and I'm right, is that it's his way of you saying the word simcha. I think simcha and menuchas nefesh are very, very closely tied together. And we also see that lashon used. For instance, Shabbos is referred to as yom menucha, but we also talk about Shabbos, we sometimes use the word simcha, simchas Shabbos, right? It's true that we don't use, it's not the same, because we do see by Yom Tov. Yom Tov is called a Zman Simchasenu, whereas Shabbos is called a time of Menucha. So it's not exactly the same. But I do think those two things are somewhat connected. That Menuchas Nefesh, at least in the context he's using it here, is similar to the context of Simcha, where other Sfarim talk about how Bitachon and Simcha are symbiotic. Meaning the idea that a person experiences no negativity. A person lives a life that has nothing negative. He's menuchas nefesh. Well, we said, if I'm correct, either way, I don't think it's far off. Either way, then the menuchas nefesh requires bitachon, right? But more than that, they're connected. If you increase menuchas nefesh, you're increasing bitachon. And if you decrease menuchas nefesh, you're decreasing bitachon. Vice versa is also true. If you increase bitachon, you're increasing menuchas nefesh. And if you decrease bitachon, so then that sentence becomes readable. Do you want to have tranquility in your life? Then you will need to be boteach on Hashem the way an Eved is boteach on his master. And if you are boteach in Hashem the way an Eved is boteach on his master, you will also have tranquility. So therefore, one of the benefits of bitachon in an ironic, not ironic, I don't want to say circular, but in almost like cyclical fashion. It's like I have bitachon, so then I have a little bit of, if I have a little bit of bitachon, I have a little bit of menuchas nefesh. I have a little bit of menuchas nefesh and bitachon, which allows me to focus on building that, growing that, becoming more dependent on Hashem in the way an Eved becomes dependent on his master. Well, then I increase my menuchas nefesh, which allows me to increase my bitachon, which allows me, again, to reinculcate that feeling and grow and grow and grow. I can keep growing these two things together, which gives me the benefit of menuchas nefesh increasing at each step of the way. And it's very telling that he uses this lashon of, if you look right over here where I'm pointing, he uses this lashon of kamoha eved chayiv tivtoch aladonav. Why is that important? Because it's a very specific description of bitachon. Life is filled with stress. And we're going to end with this because I don't want these videos to go too long. Life is filled with stress. That's just the reality of life. People, generally speaking, are not tranquil. But the reason we're not tranquil is because we're very worried about all of the things that we think we control. So, just as an example, years ago I had dreams of starting a restaurant. And I spoke to many restaurant owners. And they all advised me against it, universally. Every single one of them said, do not open a restaurant. It is the most stressful, life-destroying thing in the world, which is funny because a lot of people own restaurants and are very successful. But even when I spoke to successful restaurant owners, they had the same idea. Don't open a restaurant. It's a terrible idea. You'll be miserable. Over the years, I also spoke with many people who worked in high-stress jobs and positions. And I noticed something, and this held true across the board, even when I spoke to people in different professions. People who work in high-stress positions for someone else, meaning they work in a Fortune 500 company, they work in a giant law firm, even if they're in a very high-stress position, even if there's a lot of responsibility, and they're getting paid a lot of money, their stress is lower than someone who owns their own business. Somebody who owns their own business, again, success is almost not even part of the scale. People who are successful, people who are not successful, generally speaking, people who own their own business, be it a restaurant, be it some other business, they are more stressed out. They have more stress in their life, right? And so I think the equation is simple. The more you are in control of, the more you have decisions to make, then the more things you stress out about, right? Where if I work for someone else, there might be a lot of pressure. There might be a lot of deadlines. But at the end of the day, I'm not in charge. I'm doing what I'm told to do. I'm fulfilling my responsibilities within a framework. What if I have to do all of the things? Then I have to make all of the choices, and I have to also create the framework. And if I'm wrong about a piece of the framework, I have no one else to blame but me. All of a sudden, I have so many more things to worry about. And so I have so much more stress, so many more things to... So the less responsibility you have, ironically, the less stress you have. Who would have, in theory, in a human terms, the least possible amount of decisions to make? A slave who is completely dependent on his master. Now, I don't think any of us want to be slaves. But in theory, if a slave, like, let's just make up a story. Let's say a slave had a truly benevolent master, right? A wonderful, can you imagine being Eliezer, Eved Avraham? Avraham happens to be, gave Eliezer a lot of autonomy, so I don't know if that's really even a great mashal. But in theory, can you imagine being an Eved of a truly benevolent, generous master who takes care of everything for you, but at the same time, you have no autonomy, right? You have no voice. You have no self-voice. You are controlled by and totally under the administration of your master. So then there's not a lot for you to think about or wonder about or feel bad whether or not you're making the right decision. Your master says, go and do this. Okay, so you go and do that. There's a tremendous amount of tranquility there, of knowledge that I'm not in control. Now, the problem, of course, is that your master's human, which means he's fallible. So you're not going to ever achieve real tranquility because of the knowledge that you have in your mind that I am totally dependent on my master, but my master himself is fallible, and his bad choices could wind up affecting me, right? So even there, tranquility you won't have. But that's pretty close. So now, all of a sudden, we can understand what the Chovos HaLevavos is talking about. The true Baal Bitachon achieves a reality where he knows that every single thing is out of his hands. Sure, I can do stuff in this world, but those are only because Hashem was mechayiv me to do ishtadlus. So I have to research, and do the hishtadlus and make the best possible decisions. But there are no negative or positive consequences. Those are only from Hashem. To illustrate this, they did this amazing simulation where they gave a bunch of college kids $100,000 of fake money. It was a computer simulation. And they had them, enter the stock market with this money, and they tracked their decisions. And fascinatingly, was it that they told everyone or they didn't tell? I don't remember. I think some of them they didn't even tell that it was fake, but it wasn't their money, and they weren't responsible for the results. And fascinatingly, most of them did rather well, and they found the experience to be very pleasant. And even the ones who failed, they didn't take it too hard, and the ones who succeeded, felt great. Then they took the same people, and they gave them like $10,000 of real money, which is much less, and they couldn't handle it. It was just like they were freaking out about every decision. What should I do? How do I make the right choice? Some of them dropped out of the program. Actually, they just couldn't do it. They said, we'll cut our losses. And they said, whatever money you make, you got to keep. Whatever money you lose is on us. But the fact that it was real money and the fact that those losses were real was messing with their heads, right? What's the point? The point is when your decisions don't matter. So they were trying. There was a contest going on where each one wanted to see, oh, you started with 100,000. I started with 100,000. I ended up with 3 million. You only ended up with 200,000. I'm way better than you. So there's a motivation to succeed, but there's no stress because the decisions don't matter. They're inconsequential. So each person is going to try his best, do the research, try and make the best choices. But at the same time, there's no consequences. So although I am motivated to try my best, and although I want to do my best, and although I put in the effort to do my best, I don't feel any stress if the results have bad outcomes. Imagine if you could feel like that. It almost sounds like an absurdist version of reality. Like, can you imagine a man who came home, his family is starving, his wife and children are looking to him and saying, why are you not being mafarnes us? And he's smiling and he's happy. We would think such a person is a terrible person, right? And yet you find stories in the Gemara of such people whose wives said to them, this is not fair. Why don't we have food? Why are we living in poverty like this? Why are we suffering? And there are stories in the Gemara like this, and there are various different responses recorded. Some of them are more well-known, some of them not, the golden table leg, etc. But we find that their wives had this complaint. What was going on? It doesn't seem like and I'm not, chas v'shalom, accusing them of not being empathetic to the pain of their wives and children. But at the same time, it doesn't seem like they were personally bothered by the fact that their lives were not great or that their efforts to be mafarnes their family were not bearing fruit. I think the reason is pasha. If you are the true ultimate Baal Bitachon, you know that your actions are inconsequential to reality. Except that Hashem has been mechayev you to put in the greatest amount of effort in the best way possible. So you're going to research, because it's a mitzvah, and a chiyuv. You're going to research the best way to run your business. You're going to research the best possible decisions to make. You're going to look for the best possible employees. Not because those things make a difference or are consequential to the outcome, but because Hashem said, I require you to do this. Hashem said, I'm giving you play money. I'm giving you a play reality. And I require you to pretend it's real. Right? We know that that's part of the sign of life. But if you can overcome that, you know what you have? You have menuchas hanefesh in the way that only a servant who recognizes that his actions are required by his master to be good, and as long as he serves his master faithfully, as long as he does his best and his master is cognizant of that, his master will not be angry at him if the outcome of his actions end up being wrong because he carried them out faithfully. So if his master says, go harvest, and he goes and he does his best to produce the best harvest possible, and something goes wrong that's outside of his control, or the results of his harvest are not good, again, due to no fault of his own. If he's at fault, if he's lacking, the master might get angry at him. But as long as he is serving the master faithfully, and he comes back and he says, Master, this is the result. What total tranquility. He knows the master is fair and generous. Again, humans, you can't have this kind of bitachon. We're going to end here, because I want to keep these shirim short. And I apologize again if anybody feels like I'm dragging on one topic too long, but these are the thoughts that really motivate me and inspire me to try and really focus on this. If you could have this perspective, my decisions are not consequential to reality. accept that. The master requires it of me. Hashem has required of me. It's not a choice. Hashem requires that I try my best. He has obligated me to try my best. He has obligated me to go and study the situation, do the research, make the best possible choices. That's my chiyuv. I have no right to not fulfill my obligation in this regard. But if I do it, then that's it. I'm just a servant carrying out the will of his master, who has no autonomy, who has no choice, and who is absolutely not responsible for the results, and whose actions have no shaykhs to the results. So I just sit back and relax. I did everything I had to. I did everything I was supposed to. It's geschmack. Now there's a whole other question about, okay, but my wife and children are hungry because things aren't going. That's a great point. And empathy is required, and we see that the Nevi'im, who again, Yirmiyah had simcha even as he was watching other people suffer. So it's fascinating. So there is a way to resolve that, which I don't know that I'm holding at that level. I'm not sure I could even describe how. To, at the same time, empathize with someone's pain, feel it in a true and real way. But it does not interfere with your menuchas hanefesh, with your simchas hachayim. I'm not holding there, and I'm not sure how to even approach that. But certainly for ourselves, I think that because we can tolerate our own suffering if we put our mind to it, and it's difficult to imagine, but we see people who have difficult situations who are able to be b'simcha even in their difficult situations. So we know that it's possible. Even today, we see that people who are chas v'shalom cancer patients, people are sick, this, that, who say, you know what, I accept this from Hashem. I'm b'simcha, right? So there is such a thing. It's not beyond us, and this is how to do it. This is how the recognition that the master's in charge. You're obligated to do what you have to do, but your decisions are inconsequential to the results. They're just what the master requires of you. What a powerful thought. Shkayach. I apologize. I always tend to go overtime. If you made it here, thanks.